So I have to start with a few caveats. I realized last week that deciding to give a talk about giving good talks is nerve-wracking because I've raised the expectations higher than I really want. So I just want to admit I'm anxious about that. Two, I just wanted to say, like, why did I want to talk about this? So it's like, who am I to talk about giving conference talks? I don't claim to be like the world's authority on communication. I don't have a communications degree. I'm not a graphic designer. Like I don't have all the answers. But I will say my expertise here really just comes from two things. One, I've been thinking about how we communicate amongst ourselves for a really long time. So I've been kicking around ideas for some time. I think the most useful thing that I think maybe will be useful for you is I've used that bit of time of thinking about things to have some graduate classes on giving conference talks. So mostly what I'm going to be talking about today are things that I learned while trying to prepare to give those classes, and at the same time, things I learned actually delivering those classes. So a lot of what I'm going to show you is things, actually ideas that graduate students have given me by seeing some of the transformations that they made. But I do want to lower the expectations slightly. Like I don't think here, like everyone's going to walk out of here and like, oh, I got the 3 things I have to do to give perfect conference talks. I don't think I know how to do that. Okay, so that's just my lowering my expectations bit. Okay, so fundamentally, what do I think is the problem with conference talks in general? Well, I'm going to speak entirely from my experience. My experience when I go to conferences is several-fold, and maybe just nod gently if this sort of aligns with your experience. One is most people who have a 15-minute slot choose to put in about an hour and 20 minutes worth of material in there and just try to do it as fast as possible. Okay, good. And then also, most people don't give a presentation thinking about, most people have already sat through about 40 talks already, and they're probably a little brain dead by now. So I usually have that. And then even people, a lot of people maybe prepare, but there still are a handful of people that will maybe slap together. You actually see them in the back actually putting their talk together. And that's always the worst, is like I'm not sitting around for that person's talk. So there also is this level of like, I can just kind of slap some stuff together and wing it, and my brilliance is going to be enough to wash over everyone. Okay. Through experience of just being frustrated, and I admit, one of the problems that I have is I am probably one of the worst offenders in terms of attention span. I check out really quickly. And that's benefited me in terms of thinking about giving talks, because I try to give a talk that I could pay attention to. And since I'm probably one of the worst audience members, I'm sort of going to the lowest common denominator. So I admit that it probably bugs me more than anyone. So what I've been doing for the last 2.5, 3 years is preparing a manuscript that's this talk is kind of based upon. But I gave myself ground rules. And the biggest ground rule is I only allow myself to work on this manuscript while I'm actually attending a conference. As a result, that manuscript's probably never going to be publishable because I'm never going to finish it. And then 2, it reads like this grumpy old man screaming at the neighbors to get off their lawn because I'm always mad when I write it. But it's been a very useful way to be organize my thoughts. So that's kind of the bit. So that's what I fundamentally think is the problem. So why do I think it matters? Is it just appealing to me? Well, I think there are 2 important reasons why all of us should care about this. The first is, I think there's a lot of attention now that is given to science communication, and that it's often posed as us scientists need to be better at communicating to non-scientists. And I completely agree that that's super duper important. But I would posit that we are actually lousy at talking to each other. We're actually not that good at it. And if we're going to be good at talking to people that aren't like us, maybe we ought to get good first at talking to ourselves. It's like the first little baby step. It's sort of like a slow pitch. And those skills that we learn in talking to our people are going to apply to other people. But it's an easier lift. So that's like the first reason. And the second reason is I honestly do think that the experience of going to a conference should be one in which you leave inspired, exhilarated. That's where ideas should happen. That's where big aha moments could happen. So I honestly do think that if we could more effectively talk to each other in a way that sort of has some awareness to the context of that talk, I do think that the scientific field will progress better. So right now, our main avenue of really fully communicating is largely through scientific publications. We all know that those are not a breeze to read either. So what if there was a world where you could go to conferences and just be inspired by talk after talk after talk? I think that would be awesome for the entire field. So that's what I think is the fundamental problem. And what I'm going to talk about is some of the things that I've been learning about ways to make that process a little bit better. So what I'm going to suggest is, well, first of all, you have to have three things. So I came up with three things. But then I realized these three things are sort of hierarchical. There are different tiers. And the first tier that I'm going to talk about is if we could all sort of adopt what I'm going to call this audience-centered approach, and I'll dig into that. If we could all do that, we would automatically improve a ton. And if I had to put a number on it, we'd be 50% better. If we mastered that and we got better at having narratives and storytelling, I think we'd improve even more, maybe another 25%. And then if we mastered that, and then we want to layer in how do we actually speak in a way that's engaging and sort of draw on some principles from other fields like theater and whatnot, that would be another like 10% bump. And the way I like to think of it that way is I think then we could, as an individual, you could sort of take some of this stuff and realize you don't have to master all of this stuff. It's like just try to master one piece at a time and get some reps trying to do that, and then you could try to move on to the next tier and then move on to the next tier. So I'm going to sort of present this as sort of tiers, and honestly, you can feel free to disagree with me that these are good ideas. Like these are, frankly, half-baked ideas that I had, and honestly, I hope what we have is actually a nice conversation about other ways to think about this. So I'm going to start with this audience-centered approach and get into what do I mean by this. So in my experience, when most people get ready to give a presentation, if they think about the audience at all, they might ask this question. What does the audience already know? Which is great. But the mindset behind this is sort of like, I have a goal in mind for this presentation, and I want to know how prepared is the audience to receive the thing that I want them to receive. So it's still kind of a very selfish presenter-focused way of thinking, is that how prepared are you to receive the brilliance that I'm going to spread over you? That's basically the mindset. And it's great. It's great that we do that. And we think about what's the jargon we have to avoid. Are there concepts that maybe the audience doesn't know that I need to make sure that I fill in? Maybe there are specifics of the region where I work or the case study that I need to fill in. Like that's, of course, great. But I'm arguing here that's just scratching the surface of what it means to be thinking about the audience. So this is the question we really ought to be asking ourselves, is why did people show up? What do they want to get out of it? And it turns out audiences are incredibly selfish. It turns out, except for your friends who went there just to support you, everyone else came for their own personal gain. Right? They're not there just because they want to support some random stranger. Right? They want to get something out of it. So I'm going to ask you guys, what are some of the reasons why what you want to get out of a conference presentation?
New methods.
New methods. Great. Yeah, you want to learn a new tool that might be super useful for you. Great. Yeah. Entertainment. Yeah, sure. You want to be entertained. Somebody said something over here. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you want to get an idea for a new, maybe applies to new methods, but it's also like, oh, here's a thing I can do that's going to help me. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Maybe some original synthesis.
Can you flesh that out a little more?
Putting some ideas together in a new way that you hadn't thought of before.
Oh, yeah. So, you mean the presenter doing it, or you're allowing that to happen in your brain?
Yeah, like I might know their papers, but I don't know how they're going to put them together.
Oh, yeah. So you get a deeper mastery of that field by seeing the presenter pulse it. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
A lot of times I go to talks because I don't know anything about that particular topic,
Yeah.
and I just want to assuage my curiosity.
Yeah. So you're just like, now I know a thing. And you might want to say, hey, now I know a thing, either because, hey, when I'm writing the introduction in my paper, I want to say that this is a broad thing. Now I have a little bit of understanding of what that thing is, or it's just like, I just like knowing stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Larry, yeah.
Learning about a system so as to use it as a template to apply onto mine.
Yeah. So learning about a system so you can have insights in your own system. That's a really good one, yeah. Any other one? What other ones do we have? You're hitting all the ones I can think of. I would say, I usually have a really good talk. I usually get really good ideas about whatever I'm working on. It sort of aligns with the things that we've been talking about here, like as a new method, or I see the way someone approached a problem. I go like, I could do that for me. So I'm looking to get those flashes of inspiration. I'm looking to be maybe get a new idea by seeing like, oh, here's a topic. So as opposed to a solution, I might come up with a new question. And I want to be inspired. Those are some of the things that I want to get out of a talk. So now think about when you're giving a talk, and you're saying, why is the audience here? You want to deliver them the things that they want, right? The most effective talks are the ones where you're giving the audience what they want to have. So I would argue what we should try to be doing is think about, as a presenter, you've got a set of goals, the things that you want to achieve. At the same time, the audience has a set of goals, things that they want. The best talks are the ones that are right in here, where everyone's getting what they want. The talks that kind of fail are the ones that are hanging out in this zone, where the presenter's having a grand old time, and meanwhile the audience is checking out, they're checking their phone, they're looking at the clock, wondering how long it's going to happen. At the same token, I don't think you want to be over here either, because why bother? Right? Why bother just inspiring somebody if you're not actually getting anything out of it at the same time, unless that's your lifelong mission? Then I would say you actually are in that realm, right? So what we really want to do is find out what you want to do and have that list of things that the audience likes to get and try to make everyone happy. And those are the most effective talks. I'd say there's one more bit in terms of thinking about the audience, is thinking about what is their experience. And what I mean by this is, particularly in the realm of a conference talk, is people have probably already sat through, maybe in a given day, easily 20 talks by the time they get to yours. So their brain is not going to be as fresh and nimble as it would be even in this setting here, where even though you've worked all day, at least going to a seminar is kind of a brain reset. But when you're at a conference talk, you just saw a talk and another talk and another talk and another talk, and then maybe you got a coffee break, and then it's more talks and more talks. And thinking about the audience has that experience really, really matters in terms of what you can deliver and then how you deliver it. So I'm sort of suggesting this audience-centered approach is not just thinking about what they know, it's thinking about what they want and their experience and their ability to receive what you're trying to do. So how do you do that? I used to tell people, hey, you try to think of like the 3 things you want the audience to remember. I simply now scratched that, and now I have it down to 1 thing. And there's a couple reasons why I'll do that, and I'll get into that. But one of the things I've been doing when teaching these graduate courses is we have the students sort of look at their own conference talks, and they just look at it and say, hey, what's the one thing that if you hope you bumped into that person a week later, they would say, hey, I saw your talk about blah-de-blah. I really liked how you did this. Like what's the one thing you really want them to connect with, and what do you want them to actually retain? And why do I think that's sort of a key step in terms of anything you're trying to go forward? There's 2 main reasons. The first, if you're trying to do this whole thing and trying to hit in the sweet spot, it's a lot easier to do if you kind of restrain your goals to like, all I want to do is convey this one key message. Because then you can sort of think, now that I know what the core goal that I don't want to give up is, now I can think about how do I deliver that key goal while keeping the audience happy. So it just simplifies this process. If you're willing to drop a bunch of goals and then stick to the one and then try to find a way to give that goal that aligns with the audience. It's just a lot easier to do if you just have one core thing you want to get across. The second thing is, once you've decided fundamentally what is my talk just about, it acts as a compass to help you guide every decision you need to make in every presentation. And there's tons you have to make, right? You have to decide like how much detail am I going to go into. You're going to make decisions about the graphics you're going to use. You're going to give every slide that you make. You're going to make a bunch of decisions of what goes on that. Well, once you know what the one main purpose from your perspective is, you now have this one question you can ask every single time you go to make a slide. what's the best way to present the material to convey that one thing. And it avoids you trying to do several things at the same time, which usually I think are the reasons why we land on those busy slides that have a gajillion things going on it, and the audience just goes like that when they see it. It's because you're trying to accomplish about 9 things at the same time. And what I'm suggesting is just prioritize the one, and just all the decisions you make are in service of that one thing. Yeah?
I mean, I'm going to disagree just to disagree.
Sure.
Is it dumbing it down too much? I mean, is it like every slide, if it was the same message, are people going to get bored?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So what I'm saying is not keep saying the same thing over and over again. Like your one main thing might be a very complicated concept, and you have to get the audience there. What I'm saying is the choices that you make are not just because that's the PowerPoint default, so I'm going to do that, but you ask yourself, am I doing that because that helps me deliver the thing I want? Yeah. So your one thing could be a rich, complicated thing, for sure. Okay, so I'm just going to get into, so once you adopt that mindset, it's like, okay, I'm going to give my talk. I figured out what my one thing is. Now I'm going to start preparing the nitty-gritty technical bits. And you might think about, I'm going to have a slide that sort of talks about some things. And a lot of times you might do is you just start stopping a bunch of text on your slide. And then it might have a lot of points that you think are really important. And right now, no one is paying attention to me. I can see it. No one is looking at me. Everyone is looking at the slide. Now what I just did is I just introduced a competitor to me. And for whatever reason, I will always lose the competition to a slide. I don't know why. I think it's because we're scientists. We're like, I got to figure it out. And then it's like, I like reading, so I'm going to read. And I'm going to actually make that go away so you guys actually stop looking at that slide and you look at me. And we all do this. I mean, I do this. I mean, everything that I'm talking about are things that I have done. So why compete with your slides? Make the slides your ally. And usually we have a lot of text on your slide. Unless you're willing just to stop and go off to the side and say, read that, you're sort of unnecessarily diverting attention from you and onto the slide and not listening to anything you're saying. So the same thing that happens with like really complicated graphics. So a lot of times what we do is we'll take a graphic that appears in our paper, and because we know how to, we'll just paste that into our PowerPoint. And those graphics in a paper can be really rich and complex because the context in which you read that paper is silent. You might have your office door closed. You might have your cup of coffee. You can look at it and go back to the paper and read the figure again and go back and forth. But in a presentation, it's totally different context. And not only have you gotten a gajillion of these things hit you in the face, but someone is talking at you while you're looking at it. And in my experience, also with heavy, really, really complicated graphics, as soon as you put it up, everybody wants to figure it out for themselves. Again, because we're scientists. That's what we do. So thinking about even presenting your results, what's the best way to present it that then delivers your message? And you don't want to dumb it down to make it insubstantial, but dumb it down to the point that it serves its purpose. So from here, then the last thing I was going to say is one of the fun things about doing this thing at conferences is because when I get bored at conferences, I start working at this paper. And one of the things I do is start reading the cognitive psychology literature about attention span, which is actually really interesting. And what I've learned is there's 2 things that make people stay engaged. Is first, people have to feel challenged a little bit. So if I started coming up here and telling you stuff that you all knew, you'd quickly start tuning out. Right? So if there's not sufficient challenge, you kind of just tune. So I think of the glass of water. You want the audience member to have to sip water every now and then. That's good. A challenge corresponds to a sip of water. But at the same time, our capacity to be challenged is limited, particularly in a 15-minute block of time. And from the work in sort of the cognitive psychology world is that at some point, if the challenge becomes too much, you also check out. So the really, really great conference talks hit this perfect little balance where they're challenging you enough that you stay engaged, but not so hard that you go I just can't follow this anymore. I'm out. Right? And I think we've all been in those talks where 5 minutes in, the presenter has just gone so hard, so fast, and maybe started off with several just 3D plots, that have different colors on them, and the font's really small, and you're looking at it, and all of a sudden you realize you don't know what that person's talking about anymore, and you're too taxed and you check out. So a perfect talk is you leave the talk, if you sort of take this analogy, which I admit is totally a tortured analogy, a challenge corresponds to some sip of water. The perfect audience, perfect conference talk is when the glass starts full and ends with just a little bit left. So they're still sipping the whole time, they're staying engaged, but they aren't running out of capacity. Okay, so how do you do that? So one exercise that I do with my the graduate students is I say, hey, just go back in your a conference talk you've recently given and take a look at either a data graphic or a conceptual graphic or any part and just redo it in a way that you think challenges the audience but doesn't sort of ask too much of them to figure everything out on their own. So I'm going to show you a bunch of examples of some of the stuff that they've done, starting with an example that I always use with my students of one of my own slides to show that I'm as guilty of this as anybody. So here's going to be my example. So the starting one was here, and then where I landed was over here. So a lot of you might remember I showed this one yesterday. This is where it started right here. There's so much wrong with this slide. This is so much random stuff on there that does not need to appear there. First of all, I cleverly decided, hey, I'm going to copy and paste this little snippet from the PDF to prove to everyone that I actually read the paper. Okay. And then maybe one of these 10 authors are in the audience, and they get a little delight of seeing their name up there. But apart from that, that doesn't do anything other than distract the audience from whatever I'm saying. They're going to look at that and say, why is that there? Why should I look at that? So that's the one dumb thing I did. And then I did the other thing is I just copied and pasted one of their figures that was sort of the main result that I was referencing. And that figure's got a lot going on. And this is even fairly simple. There's a lot of different colors going on. There's this thing here with numbers. There's no units on it. And as an audience member, you're immediately going to go to that, try to figure out what's going on there. And, of course, you're going to tune me out while I'm doing that. Then to make matters worse, I decided, hey, let's put a puffin on there. So now everyone's like a puffin's more interesting than me. I'm going to lose a puffin charisma battle every single day. So I did all of that, and I was using this for a long time until I actually did the exercise. Like, what's the key idea I wanted to convey? And the key idea I wanted to convey was that seabirds really don't care about fluctuations in prey abundance as long as there's kind of a lot of fish, and they only really care about fluctuations in prey abundance when prey are scarce. So I replaced that whole thing with this little diagram here that if you were here yesterday, you saw me walk through that. And it was just sort of getting the idea that, hey, they care here and they don't care there. This is the only part of that I really cared about. And given, this was in my introduction. If this was my science that I did and it was my result, sure, I'd want to give the complicated data slide. But this was just context for me to talk about my research. So why expend precious water on stuff that isn't mine when all I want to do is get across this main idea? So that's what I'm talking about, thinking about what's the most effective way to convey the main idea that I wanted to do. This was not my one thing, so why spend a lot of audience's cognition on that? So that was my example. I'm going to go through a bunch of student examples. Here's a cool one. This is by a student named John Best. This is from his master's talk. A lot of stuff happening here. There's words here. I'm not entirely sure what those mean. There's an omega, so that's cool. There's logistic water content. I don't know what logistic water content is, but it's related to water content, I guess. There's a lot of points and different colors. There's acronyms here, and you could all stare at that forever. When he did this exercise, he realized all he really wanted to show was that there was a relationship between water content and resistivity for only 2 types of soils. And all the other types of soils, there wasn't a relationship. So that's what he was showing here. Resistivity only helps if you have peat or silt, otherwise it doesn't matter. That was the only point he wanted to make. And he realized he'd been using this for a really long time, and this made the point he wanted to make. So this is an example that this is delivering the message he wanted in the way that can still challenge an audience. It's still interesting to look at. It's still, you can see the logic behind it without getting sucked up in the nitty-gritty details of all these different stuff. So that's just one example. The next 2 are sort of more introduction type slides, sort of giving a walkthrough of some methods. This is the original. This was Hannah Sipe. She works on looking at the presence and absence of loons on lakes in Washington. And this was her original slide. There's a lot going on here. There's an acronym. Acronyms always take a couple extra cognition sips, so try to avoid acronyms. I don't understand how these words are related to each other. But what she's doing is describing the data and the model all together. So I'm going to show you how she took all the same information and represented it graphically. So here's her replacement. You go out and survey a lake, and either one of 4 things happen. Either you don't survey it, you survey it and there's no loons. You survey, you see a loon that has babies. So that's basically half that previous slide was conveyed in this graphic, and this is get burned in all of your retinas right now in your brains. Right? It's very clear, very easy to see. And then the model looks like this. If you see no loons, reality could be there really aren't any loons, or maybe there is a loon and you didn't see it, or there's a loon with chicks and you didn't see it. So the truth could be any of these three things if you saw this. If you saw this, you know that there are loons present or there are loons with reproduction. And then finally, if you see this, this is the only possible state of nature. So that describes her model in a beautiful graphic, totally easy to see. It's great. Another example. This was by Silvana Gonzalez. We see a lot of slides like this. It's sort of trying to do the equivalent of an introduction. It has references showing that it compares a bunch of things. I don't know what's going on here, but her redo of this was brilliant. It was about looking at how we do ecological risk assessment for areas where we're going to do marine renewable energy, like tidal energy, stuff like that. And her point is we typically look at describing the physical characteristics of different areas and use that to make inferences about the biological characteristics. So the underlying hypothesis she wanted to test, if you take a look at two different systems that have similar physical characteristics, do they have similar biological characteristics? Or maybe they're different. And then conversely, do you look at two different areas that have really different physical characteristics? Maybe they have shared biological characteristics. Those were the two hypotheses she wanted to test. Again, nice, not dumbing it down, but trying to convey it in a way that doesn't overly tax, doesn't make you do a lot of reading, but gets the same information across. And the way they are able to get at this is actually step back and say, well, fundamentally, what do I want the audience to get? So these are some exercises that we do in our class. I'm going to have these posted throughout the entire thing, and I'm happy to share these things if people want to play with it. First, you can do the thing that I just showed you. Just take a graphic slide that you did, and just think about what's the best way to revise it that just gives the information that is necessary for the task that it was intended. If you really want to push yourself, give an entire presentation with no added text. Just for fun, I spent an entire year just for fun giving talks with no text, just to see what it's like. And probably my talks probably suffered as a result, but it pushed me to go really, really far, to be really, really critical about why am I adding text. It wasn't until my students actually said, Tim, stop. It's not helping anymore. I said, oh, okay, thanks. The other thing I like to encourage people is just be willing to take some risks. And maybe taking risks, maybe not do it at the most important conference you're ever going to give, but maybe do it in the safety of a lab meeting or something like that. Where you take an idea or a challenging concept and just try a totally new, out-of-the-box way to present it. Just see how it goes. And it's through those taking risks that you find those really cool, creative things. And then another exercise that we find really useful is just take a recent conference talk you've recently given. Think about what was your one main thing. And then sort of critically go through your talk and say, well, how many of those things really helped enhance the delivery of the one thing? And what things were maybe didn't need to be there? And maybe you could have spent more time focusing on other things. Just really useful exercises. OK, so that's the audience-centered approach. That's the biggest chunk, because I think it's fundamentally the biggest piece by far. I'm going to spend comparatively less time over here and then hopefully just have a conversation. And I'm really keen to hear your insights and thoughts about other things that need to be folded in as well. So let's jump into storytelling. And honestly, I probably shouldn't have called this storytelling. It's more just thinking about the framing of how you're going to give your presentation. And again, I dipped into the cognitive psychology world. And pretty much there are two structures that can both be fairly effective to try to convey information, particularly in these short chunks. The first is called the assertion evidence approach. That's the word someone else came up with. And I dumbed it down here to say the thing, back up the thing, and then say the thing again. So most of us have heard this advice before. Usually it's like tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. That's the same basic thing. Just for fun, let's contrast that to what normally happens in a lot of presentations is basically evidence assertion. That is, this thing over here is how people commonly present their material because it aligns, I think, with the scientific paper. Namely, you start off with the question, maybe why the question is important, how did I answer it, and then you have the answer, and then why does it matter? The reason why this isn't as effective is because you're just the classic burying the lead. The most important thing is this. Whereas the assertion evidence says you start with this, you back it up, and then you tell them the thing again one more time. So one way we might be better at a field. Oh, another thing I would say, when people do try to adopt this sort of method, in my experience, instead when they say the thing, what they usually end up doing is they end up saying this instead. They say, today in this talk, I'm going to answer the question, why does it rain on Thursdays? Right? But then the audience has to wait for the answer. Instead of saying, in this talk, I'm going to tell you that it rains on Thursdays because that's when seminar is, and that makes everyone go to seminar. That's making the claim. And then you spend the rest of the time backing up that claim. I'm just going to give an example that I gave at a talk last summer about using that. I'm just going to show you how I began the talk. And there's a lot of words here. This is the title of my talk. It was basically looking at ecological responses to a particular fisheries management in two really contentious areas. One is New England, which if you know anything about fisheries, that's about as contentious as it gets. And then in my backyard, the U.S. West Coast. And they adopted this particular management strategy called catch shares, which are also very controversial. So I started the talk like this. There's a lot of people that talk about catch shares in these systems that basically say catch shares are the hero that have saved these particular fisheries. There's an equal number of people that have said catch shares are the villain. I'm here to tell you that catch shares are the Neville Longbottom of fisheries. If you don't know Harry Potter, that's fine. Neville Longbottom, he plays an important role, for sure, but he's not the central player. So he's relevant, but he's not the star, and he's not the villain. And then I spent the rest of the talk backing that claim up. Okay, so that's what I mean by just starting off with a strong claim, the strongest claim that you think you can support. So I'm not suggesting making a claim you can't support, and then spend the rest of the talk backing that up. It just gives the audience a hook to know what to be listening for. Okay, so assertion evidence works. I would say, though, if everyone did that, it would still probably be a little exhausting. And that's where we get into actual straight-up storytelling. The main reason why people advocate storytelling, because it turns out as human beings, we love stories. It's a way that we absorb information. It's a way that we attach meaning to information. And I don't know why it is. There's probably some evolutionary biology reason why that is. So if you can turn your scientific work into a story, it's way more likely to be retained by the audience, and they're going to be engaged. And that's just not me saying it. There's actually sort of literature to back that up. But it turns out that turning our scientific stuff into stories is way harder than anyone will really tell you. It's hard to convey what we view as a logical chain of ideas into a rich narrative. So what I'm going to talk now is sort of the different ways people think about story structure, and then break it down into a version of storytelling that I found is more receptive to scientists. And this just comes from me working with graduate students and us collectively trying to turn their works into stories. So one way you can look at story structure is really simple. Every story has a beginning, middle, and end. I find this kind of useless because, just by virtue of the fact that a talk is time limited, of course it's going to have a beginning, middle, and end. That doesn't really help me sort of figure out what is the key elements. Slightly more complicated version of a story structure says there's a beginning, there's conflict that happens, there's a call to action that result of that conflict, then there's a resolution, and then there's an end. That's a little bit more helpful, but I haven't found people that really go onto that. And then the sort of classic hero's journey story is well encapsulated by what people call the 7-sentence story. People have heard the 7-sentence story idea before? 7-sentence story is basically every story. Think of like any Marvel movie will follow this. Most blockbuster movies follow this. It goes like this: once upon a time, and every day, until one day, and because of that, things happen, and because of that, things happen, until finally, and then ever since, So you can take like Star Wars Episode 4, which really was the first Star Wars, New Hope. Once upon a time, there was a moisture farmer named Luke, and every day he worked the moisture farm, longing for more adventure in his life, until one day he bought a droid that showed him a hologram of a princess, and because of that, he seeked out the loner Ben Kenobi, and because of that, he learned the ways of the Force and learned that there was this whole war going on, until finally he destroyed the Death Star, and ever since he committed himself to learning the ways of the Force and saving the universe. Okay, that's a 7-sentence story. Thank you. I didn't write that story, but thank you. I'll send that along to George Lucas next time I see him. So yeah, all the classic things basically follow that basic thing. So, but I've found that's too much for scientists because we don't think about our work that way. We don't think ourselves as having this sort of narrative structure in terms of our day-to-day life. So I'm going to show you a structure that I found just works really nicely that retains what I think are the key elements of how people stay engaged in stories. So here's my proposal for a story structure. Starts off with the ordinary world, which is basically the same like the beginning. Think of the opening scenes of Hollywood movies. You're basically just getting to know who these people are, what they're like, what they do, whatever. And in the science, it's like it can basically, what do we know or what do we think? You know? And it doesn't have to be you personally. It could be what does the field basically think about a thing. Or it could be, a way, it could be if it's a method stock, the ordinary world are, these are the ways in which we try to answer this question, but it has some sort of limits. And then comes a challenge. And the challenge could be, hey, there's some paradox. Like, why does that happen? There could be some unmet need. Like, boy, we know how to do this, but it turns out most of the time we knew how to do that. That's the challenge that you're trying to address. Or the really fun ones are you have conflicting theories, where you've got one theory says this should happen, another should be that should happen. How can those two things reconcile? So that's a classic, just like this would be the equivalent of Luke buying the android. And that all of a sudden there's something that needs to be fixed. Then there's this middle part, and this is actually the most of what we do every day. This is the middle bit. So a series of actions to try to overcome that challenge. And in a really good story arc, those challenges get more and more difficult as you go. And if you sort of think about a blockbuster movie, particularly if it's a hero's journey type of story, the hero, they always face their hardest challenge at the end. Because it'd be really, really boring if they faced their hardest challenge at the beginning, and then you basically just watched nothing happen for like an hour. Who's seen Black Panther? Yeah, so Black Panther follows this beautifully, where T'Challa, has to face that fight to retain his crown early. You know he's going to win, right? Because it's like in the first 20 minutes of the movie. There's no way he's going to be out. But you know that's going to happen again. He's probably going to lose because he's facing a tougher rival at that point. So that's a perfect example. The challenges get bigger and bigger and bigger, and we love that. We just get sucked into that. And then finally, you need to have a resolution. And then one thing to know is you don't have to have a happy ending to your movie. Right? The movie of your whatever story. In fact, stories can basically have 4 different types of endings. The protagonist gets what they wanted and it was good. The protagonist gets what they wanted, but it's bad. The protagonist doesn't get what they wanted, but it's good. And the protagonist doesn't get what they want and they're bad. So you feel free to use any of those. Yeah, that could be the ending of your story. So it could be a total failure, but maybe that was good that was a failure, right? Or maybe it was a total failure and it really was bad for you, which you're probably not going to do that at a conference, be my guess. And then finally, and this is the part that I think, if you're taking notes, like underline it a bunch of times, is describing the new world. Where do we live now as the result of your work? And how is that different from where we started? That's what makes it a story. You started in some ordinary world, blah, 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 blah. There's a challenge, you do a bunch of things, there's a resolution, and now you're in a new place. So what's that new place? And contrast it to where you started. Now that makes it a full story. And I find that this is really amenable to the way we think about our work. We tend to think about our work sort of pushing science from the ordinary world to the new world. So if you don't like yourself being the protagonist, you can make the scientific field where you work the protagonist of your story. And the protagonist has moved things from this ordinary world to the new world. So spend a little time in your talk contrasting the new world from the ordinary world. That helps tie it all together. So if you want to do some exercises, one thing you might do if you're going to do the assertion evidence thing, just for fun, in the spirit of taking risks, you think of the most provocative but still supportable claim of your talk. And try to lead with that, and then center the whole talk about that. This is an exercise that I stole from a reference I'll show you, a book called Connections, is what's the one-word theme of your talk? And this is super, super hard to do. You would think it'd be easy, just pick a word. But I found when you ask scientists to do this, they immediately go to science jargon. So one student said, hey, what's the one-word theme of your talk? And he said, heteroscedasticity. There's never been a good story written about heteroskedasticity. So I always tell the students, like, find those words that like hit you in the gut, that have like a lot of emotional resonance. And it could be like surprise. Surprise is kind of a cop-out because all science could be a surprise, but it could be like blindness I've used once. I was giving a talk about hypoxia and how we're sort of looking at the ecological effects of hypoxia, but we can't really see what's going on. And it was, blindness. That's the theme of my talk, of groping around trying to see what's going on. For the heteroskedasticity person, we eventually landed on variety, which is a word that has a lot more interesting hit. And actually very much hit what he was talking about. He was hitting on the fact that different animals in a population grow at different rates, and you need to think about that. So the key thing is there's a variety in the actual what's out there in life. Another fun exercise, I just realized I have 2 number ones. Look at that. Is when you see like those trailers that start off in a world where blah 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 blah, one person must do da da da. Come up with a log line for your talk. Basically, it's creating a 2-sentence version of your entire story, and it's super hard to do. Like, I'm not telling you it's easy, but once you do that, it makes it really, really easy to figure out how to structure your story. And then just like I would never do this in a conference, but again, if you just want to practice, like just totally ham it up and just lean into the idea, like I'm going to make my movie, a Marvel movie or just any old classic blockbuster movie, and hit all the classic beats that happen in those things, just to kind of push the envelope that way. It's that when you go give a talk, you have a little bit more wiggle room. Okay, so I'm going to close in the final minutes of talking about this whole idea of speaking to be understood. For those of you who took the workshop I did yesterday, what I mean here is all the things we talked about in that particular in that workshop. And one of the things I told everyone in the workshop is just imagine for a moment like an audio book of a book you really like, that the audio book has a really, really great voice actor narrating it. That's really, really engaging. Okay? Now, imagine swapping out that amazing narrator, and instead, your audiobook is going to be narrated by Siri. How engaging is that going to be? Not very. It's the exact same words, but completely uninteresting. And that's because you can convey meaning by how you say the words. And I'm not going to put Christina on the spot, but Christina had a great example because she took my 5-week version of the class of just way she just emphasized one particular word said about 3 minutes worth of text, just by the sarcasm that she tinged to the word in a very professional way. So actually, if I say anything, it'd save you time because you don't have to add words to things. You can change the way you're saying the words will make your sort of word economy more efficient. This is something I frankly don't know how to talk about in this setting. I can do it in a workshop, but I do have 2 sort of tangible suggestions for that. And saying probably the most important word you're going to say in your entire presentation is the word but with 1 T. Thank you for laughing. And what I mean by that is when you say but, you're signaling to the audience, I'm introducing the challenge right now. Right? So if I say, hey, the theory of blah, blah, blah tells us that blah, 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 but blah, 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 blah. By saying but in a very clear and distinct way, you know that's an important transition that I'm signaling. And the most common feedback I give in my graduate seminar is people say the but they give it 0 emphasis. Blah, 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 and the audience misses that it even happened. They miss the fact that you just introduced the challenge. So again, you feel free to giggle, but I always tell people just lean into the but. just really, really emphasize it. It's one of the simplest things you can do. Is just have this a moment of pause and just make it really clear. You're saying but, and then say what else you're going to say. And then the second most important word you're going to say is nothing. Just allow some air to exist in between your words. And particularly at a conference talk when everyone is just like blah, 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 blah. And I know as a presenter it feels awful to pause for a moment. It feels like an eternity when you're up there. But I think you all know as an audience member, you don't even notice those pauses. Like I just introduced a couple and you probably didn't even notice it. And the pause is what you can do so many things. The pause can add emphasis. It can act as just a break in between key parts of the talk. And a lot of times what we do is like say, now I'm going to get into the second part of the talk. Now I'm going to the third part of the talk. And maybe instead of saying that, you could just say nothing for a few seconds and then just go on to the second part of the talk, and the audience will figure it out because it turns out you guys are pretty smart. So just allowing yourself space to let nothing happen is a really useful tool. So how do you get better at sort of conveying meaning in the way you say stuff? One of the things is a great idea, and I know it's painful, is just record yourself and then listen to it, but listen to it and pay zero attention to the words and just listen to the way you're saying things. So you can pay attention to the cadence, you can pay attention to your pitch, pay attention to your volume, and basically ask, is there variety in those things? And think about your presentation like music. You know, if music is like dance music, it's do, 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 do. Unless if you're not dancing, it's really boring, right? So try to mix that up. Have pauses, have increase in volume, decrease in volume, increase your pitch, lower your pitch, all that stuff. The other thing you do is just watch a speaker that you find particularly charismatic, whoever that person might be. And then think about, what do they do? What's so engaging about what they talk? And then just steal stuff. It's free. Go ahead. And similarly, listen to a good voice actor, and then figure out what do they do to make you interested. What are the ways they add an interest and inflection? And then finally, take a class, take an acting class, take an improv class, or whatever, and really just demand that the instructor emphasize the ability to convey information without words. That's really what I'm sort of talking about. Okay, so again, this is basically what I'm thinking about is, hey, let's get better at thinking about the audience more than just are they prepared to receive the thing that I want to do. 2, can we frame our information in ways that are more receptive? And then 3, can we think not just about the words, but the way that we say it? And then the way I wanted to close this up, a couple things. One, as I mentioned, I really want to hear your thoughts of other things that maybe I've missed, or maybe nuances of this, or maybe you just completely disagree. Awesome. But the other thing, I guess I would say at a higher level, is as scientists, we expect people are going to come into the field and have to learn how to do science. And we definitely are so skeptical of any type of new idea, and we say it has to be proven. So how about we take just a little bit of that scientific skepticism, we apply it to the way in which we give conference talks. And say, hey, I know that you're organizing your conference talk that way. How do you know that that's a good way to do it? Let's just take a smidgen of that and actually, at the same time, presume that people have to learn that in the same way that we learn all the other skills of doing science. But not expect anyone just going to willy-nilly wander in and be able to bang out a perfect conference talk. Like, of course not. So that's basically like my higher level, I guess, call to action is let's apply a little bit of our scientific skepticism to our sort of default ways in which we give scientific presentations. So I'm going to close with a couple things, resources, and then these are my exercises I did for this particular talk. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, great talk. I have one question about conferences are steeped in tradition.
Yeah.
There's kind of certain ways that you're expected to do
Yeah.
things. And a lot of people, especially at the graduate student level, are trying to build credibility.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great point. And I really wrestle with this in my manifesto. It's kind of easy for me to do this because I've got a job, and unless I do something illegal, I'm probably not going to lose it. And it's definitely, I think it's harder as a junior scientist. I would say maybe as senior scientists, maybe we have to take the charge in order to change the standards and culture. And I think a lot of the reasons why a lot of conference talks are kind of dull and boring is as young scientists we wander into this and we say, oh, this is what's expected of me. I'll do what everyone else does. And maybe it's up to us to maybe make the change to make it easier for the young scientists. And particularly because it's young scientists that are usually most open to doing the new stuff. Stodgy people like me are like, I want to do it my way. I had another great idea, but I forgot what it was. So maybe it'll come to me later.
And sort of a follow-up comment, and that is that graph that you showed about the soil types.
Yeah.
Like, I'm totally fine with that. But, like, Tim would want, the first thing he would say was, well, I got to see the data.
Yeah.
And so how do you maintain that and also
Yeah.
provide credibility that that line is actually demonstrating something that is real?
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think it would depend on if the one thing of your talk was the result, then I think for sure you got to show the data to have the credibility. If that's just to make a point to get to your talk, maybe you don't need to give all the nitty-gritty details. And I think as audience members, we're willing to give the benefit of the doubt if you're just setting up context. So that's why I say identify what's the one main thing you want to give across. But then at the same time, there is actually, when you think about why is the audience there, what do they want? Certain audiences want to see the nitty-gritty detail, and you have to give that. So like economists, they want to see every equation that you ever use. And if you don't show it to you, they're going to be mad because they want it. Right? It's important to them. So this giving the audience what they want doesn't mean dumbing it down. It's honestly delivering what they actually expect. So that's maybe how I think about it. Yeah, Jeremy.
So thinking about your talk yesterday, I don't think you built any of your plots.
No.
But I like to do that, especially for my big data plots,
Mm-hmm.
because I want to have that publication level of
Yeah.
complexity.
Mm-hmm.
But I know I can't just turn on the fire hose.
Right. Right.
Can you speak to kind of how you decide that balance, or if you just strongly recommend we should just always simplify our slides?
No, I mean, so one of the slides I did yesterday, I did build, and that was feedback my graduate students told me, is I started off with the publication graph, and they were like, Tim, that was way too much stuff all at once. And so instead, I took the part that mattered, and then I layered it by adding one thing after another. So by the end, they saw the publication graphic, but I built them through it, rather than hitting it all at once, and then because we're scientists, like I'm going to figure it out before the scientist tells me. So that's usually what I do. And then I just ask myself, is it important that the audience knows all the nitty-gritty of this, yes or no? And then sometimes it's yes, in which case I gotta deal with that. Sometimes the answer is no, in which case, like, what is the core nugget that I want to get across? Yeah, Brendan.
Thanks, I really enjoyed that. But I had one question. So the exercises you had your grad students do,
Mm-hmm.
right? You took a slide that may not be great,
Mm-hmm.
and then went through the exercise of trying to make it more visual, sort of
Yeah.
take out the text. So what is your recommended strategy for sort of storyboarding and creating a talk?
Oh, yeah.
Do you start with putting basically a bad talk together and then trying to figure out how to make it better? It just doesn't seem like a
Yeah.
time-efficient way to
No, it isn't. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't really touch on that. That's a really good question. I always tell people don't start your talk with a blank PowerPoint presentation because that's just going to invite you to populate the slides with stuff because it becomes a brain dump. It just invites me to do it. And I end up with talk that's a bunch of bulleted lists. And bulleted lists are not that interesting and actually not a great way to convey information. They're good for conveying certain things that are literally lists, but if it's things that aren't literally a list, it's not great. So I usually start off, I'm a whiteboard person, so I usually whiteboard everything. Other people will like to just use pencil and paper, but I try to come down to what's the really one thing. I try to do like the log line in one word story, and I use that then to motivate my sort of what I think the structure is going to be. Then once I know the structure, then I start populating it with content. So that's my process, but I think everyone has to find their own process. Yeah.
I wonder how you apply some of these lessons to teaching.
Mm.
And in particular, sometimes when you teach, there are,
Yeah.
the students do have to have the
Yes,
published
absolutely.
stuff, and they do have to
Yep.
have some detailed information that they need to take away.
Yep.
So do you just give that to them separately, or how do you do that?
Yeah, and it comes right down to, so when I'm teaching, I do think about this a lot. And sometimes I want them to see, the rich thing because I want them to learn how to diagnose it. Sometimes it's just because I want them to get the concept, and then maybe I don't care about all the richness. I just want them to know, like, this is the direction of effect, right? So it sort of depends on what the learning objective is around that. So what I do in teaching is basically I articulate really clearly what do I want the students to be able to do at the end of this particular lecture, and then I populate the material so that they can do that. So I start with that, and then I work backwards. And sometimes it's a messy, nasty thing. Sometimes it's a big, nasty equation. Jenna and Tim have seen big, nasty equations in my class. But sometimes it's just a conceptual diagram. Sort of depends. I'll go here, then back over there.
So I noticed that you tend to use white background, and then you have,
Mm.
I was wondering if you have any advice about color and use of color and
Oh, yeah.
palette and things like that in slides?
That's a great. I would defer. Like, I'm so not an expert that I would probably want to find someone who actually knows something about graphic design and how people experience those things, and actually figure out what is the best way to do something. This was just my default is to go with the simplest possible thing, which is black on white, and it could be there's a better way to do it. I just don't know what it is. Yeah. Yeah.
So, we didn't talk at all about body language.
Mm-hmm.
And is that just because that's covered mainly through improv, or
Yeah.
just as important, I think, in storytelling?
It is. I completely agree. Yeah. And I do that a lot in my improv class. So, like, one of my favorite teaching tricks I do is think of it as a classroom like this. If I'm like really want to emphasize something, I just walk towards the students, and but it always gets their attention every way. It's the simplest thing you can do. So I am a big proponent of like conveying with your whole body, what it is you want them to convey, and using physicality to denote beats to what you're trying to say. Yeah, here in the front.
How do you reconcile the inherently kind of black and white protagonist-antagonist nature of a story with wanting to speak to everyone in your audience, particularly if you're talking about something contentious? Like,
Yeah.
you make a point that someone in your audience probably isn't going to be very happy about,
Yeah.
but you still want to
Yeah.
get that story in there?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. I've thought a lot about that. Yeah? Oh, sure. So I'll try to paraphrase the question. It's basically, how do you go to this sort of protagonist, antagonist in a story when you're talking about stuff that's really contentious, and there are going to be people that maybe really sharply disagree with you? Is that definitely? So when I think about the audience goals, isn't necessarily making the audience happy. Right? So if the audience goal is they want to know what it is that you're doing, or the audience wants to, what the current thinking of that particular lab group or your particular lab group is very different from them walking away pleased with your answer. And when I actually tell people about this, assertion evidence and say a thing, I find a lot of people are scared to say anything that's provocative because they're afraid that people are going to get mad at the very beginning. And I always argue, well, if they're mad, at least they're going to be paying attention. And if you could support it at the end of the day, they might get to the end and be a lot less mad. And those are the questions that at the end, and the grumpy person, and they're like, well, I mostly agree with you, but, and they just want to rib you a little bit, but even though you kind of convinced them. But yeah, you're never going to make everyone happy with you. But you at least can align what you're doing with why they're in the room. And that's really all you can choose to do. And I think that's why one of the reasons why we end up bland is we want to be as inoffensive as possible. And then ends up kind of being, eh. So it's 5:03. I will continue to questions you want, but if people want to leave, feel free to leave. So I'll formally stop now, and then we can talk more later. Thank you.